Thank you very much, Stephen Collinson. So how is Congress responding to news of a new security advisor and increased sanctions on Iran? Joining me now to talk about all of this is U.S. Democratic Congressman Bera. Thanks, Congressman, for being with us. First of all, your reaction to this new national security advisor. I don't know if you heard my conversation with Stephen, but at least in style, very different to John Bolton.
You know, I did. We don't know a whole lot about Mr. O'Brien. It does look like he's got some similar stances to Mr. Bolton, but I agree with you in style. He does seem to be a different stylistic national security advisor. We'll look forward to getting to know him a little bit more. And this is obviously an incredibly important time. You touched on tensions in the Middle East with Iran, and we need that national security. A concern is if the president is surrounding himself with folks that are just going to agree with them, that really isn't the best way to do joint decision making. We want dissension, we want differences of opinion, and we want the president to be able to hear all of the differing opinions as we move forward. And obviously, we'd like the president to work closely with us in Congress as well.
On the Iran question, a national security advisor who would disagree with him is more likely to be in support of some sort of military action, because the president seems to be indicating he's not in any hurry to go to war with Iran over that attack on the Saudi oil field over the weekend. In your opinion, what should the United States be doing?
We've heard the president make various comments, but he's been pretty clear he doesn't want to have another war in the Middle East. Now, if he's going to ratchet up sanctions, the sanctions that we already have in place have been pretty biting. The goal now would be, if you are going to increase sanctions, is it to get the Iranians to the table to negotiate? What is that end goal? And again, this is where I'd urge President Trump to work with our allies, so we're speaking with one voice, and work with Congress. So, there's a single U.S. foreign policy as we address this crisis and this challenge.
Yeah, you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee. What do you think the United States should do? Iran has said we won't come to the negotiating table, unless essentially there's some sort of relief on sanctions. The United States strategy is the exact opposite. It is increasing sanctions. What would you do?
Well, so I would look to try to decrease tensions in the Middle East. I don't think the American public or even the global community wants to see increasing tensions, and they'd like to get a resolution of what's happening in Yemen, but also the tensions between the Saudis and the Iranians. So I would try to, negotiation's never a bad thing, and being a senior member on the Foreign Affairs Committee, diplomacy certainly is something that we'd prefer. That doesn't mean no preconditions, but invite the Iranians potentially to the table. I would do it in a multilateral way with our allies, and I would make sure you have congressional support as well.
Right, and that's something that was done to achieve the Iran deal. Of course, the United States walked away from the Iran deal. Were you able to see that news conference from the Saudi Arabian Ministry of Defense spokesperson showing journalists evidence that Iran was behind this attack?
I was not able to catch that news conference. We've heard reports that the Saudis certainly think the Iranians were behind this, or at least supplied the Houthi rebels with equipment. That said, we've got to figure out how to
Congressman, I can tell you what essentially the spokesperson said. He showed remnants of missiles used in the attack and drones as well, saying that there are circuit boards that were pretty much intact that could allow them to trace this back to Iran, but did not provide, as far as I could tell, evidence that the attack originated from Iran. Is it your understanding and your belief that the attack came from inside Iran?
That isn't my belief, and again, I don't think we've seen that type of evidence. And again, I would try to look for a path towards de-escalating this, but I'd again urge President Trump to work with our European allies and others, much as we did around the Iran nuclear deal.
Let me ask you, since you're from California, about the administration revoking your state's ability to set its own vehicle emission standards. And California has much stricter emission standards than the rest of the country, or at least than what's required by federal law. And so essentially California became the de facto emission standard of the country, because automakers don't sell different cars to different states. How do you react to this development today?
Look, I think this is another effort by President Trump to take on California. He clearly doesn't like us, but I love being a Californian. We've led the way in climate policy and environmental policy, and we've had this waiver for years. Even the automakers are willing to work with us, so I think this is a step back. I expect our Attorney General, Javier Becerra, to sue the Trump administration in court. And again, this has been a policy that's in place. It's the right policy, and it's moving California and hopefully the country and the world in the right direction.
Let me ask you one quick last question on the Democratic candidates running for president. Who do you support and why?
You know, I haven't endorsed anyone. I think we've got a wide variety of candidates running. You know, obviously, as someone who thinks about foreign policy quite a bit, you know, you've got a very experienced person in Vice President Joe Biden, who I think could hit the ground running on day one. But again, haven't endorsed anyone, and I'm glad that we've got these talented folks running.